The year was 1879, deep in the heart of an unforgiving Arizona summer, the kind that cooked the land until the very air shimmered like molten glass. Heat pressed down on the earth with the weight of a hammer, smothering everything beneath it. The sky was a pale, merciless blue, so wide and empty it made a man feel small. Even the wind, when it chose to move, carried more dust than comfort. A lone rider moved through that sun-bleached silence, his figure wavering in the distance like a half-formed ghost until he drew near enough to be real. His horse, a weather-scarred sorrel with ribs faintly visible beneath its coat, plodded onward with the resigned patience of a creature long accustomed to endless miles. The rider sat tall despite his weariness, a man hardened by time, war, and his own mistakes. Jackson Crow had been many things in this life: Union scout, drifter, hired tracker, an occasional outlaw depending on who told the story. But now he was none of those things. Or perhaps he was all of them at once. Home had not existed for him in years, and he'd stopped expecting it to. The trail was the only constant, the dust his companion, and the future nothing but a long stretch of empty horizon. He rode with no destination except away from memories that clawed at him when he slept, away from regrets that stalked him like shadows. But men like him rarely moved through the West without stumbling into somebody else's trouble, and trouble was exactly what found him that day. The scream reached him first, a sharp, desperate cry that sliced through the stillness. A woman. Young. Terrified. It echoed off canyon walls and rolled across the desert floor like thunder. Jackson didn't think. He turned his horse so fast the animal nearly stumbled. His hand went to his rifle automatically, instincts honed by years of battles and ambushes. He kicked the horse into a rough gallop, the beast's hooves sending up bursts of dust as they crossed the cracked earth. The screams came again, shorter, choked. Jackson felt something inside him tighten. Out here, women didn't scream unless death was coming for them. He reached a dry wash lined with mesquite and thorn scrub. The branches clawed at his coat as he dismounted silently. Rifle up. Steps measured. Breath quiet. Voices, male, rough, slurred with cruelty. He crept forward until the scene unfolded before him in a violent tableau. Two white trappers, clothes filthy and torn from weeks in the wild, stood cornering a young Apache woman against a cluster of boulders. Her dark hair hung loose in tangled waves down her back. Her dress, simple buckskin decorated with beadwork, was ripped at the shoulder, exposing a long bleeding cut. Her chest rose and fell in panicked, ragged breaths. She held a small knife, trembling but defiant. One trapper laughed as she tried to dart past him. He shoved her back and she stumbled to her knees. "Quit squirming," the taller man snarled. "We just want a little. Step away from her." Jackson's voice cut through the scene like a blade. Calm. Cold. Deadly. Both men turned. One snorted in surprise, the other narrowed his eyes. "Ain't your business, friend," the shorter one growled. "She's just—" Jackson fired before the sentence finished. The taller trapper jerked backward, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He crumpled without a sound. The second trapper reached for his pistol with shaking hands, eyes wide, but Jackson had already chambered his next shot. The crack of the rifle echoed off the canyon walls, then silence swallowed everything. Dust drifted slowly from where the second man had fallen. For a moment, even the wind seemed afraid to move. The young woman did not run. She stood perfectly still, eyes locked on Jackson with fierce, unblinking intensity, eyes dark as coal, bright as obsidian struck by firelight. She breathed hard, but she did not shrink away as some might have. Jackson lowered his rifle carefully and approached with open hands. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said quietly. She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed on him, sharp and assessing, like she was measuring the truth of his words and the spaces between them. He noticed the blood dripping from her arm, steady, dark, too much. Without thinking, he stripped off his coat and held it out. She hesitated only a second before taking it with her uninjured hand. "My name's Jackson," he said softly. "Let me look at that wound." Still silent, she allowed him to kneel before her. He worked with practiced efficiency, tearing a strip from his shirt, cleaning the wound with water from his canteen. She winced once, jaw tightening, but she never pulled away. He admired that strength in silence, steel beneath fear. By the time the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the canyon, he built a small fire away from the bodies and offered her jerky from his saddlebag. She accepted it slowly, still watching him like he was some unfamiliar creature that needed studying. "What's your name?" he asked after a while. The fire popped between them. Coyotes howled in the distance. She stared into the flames for a long moment, then whispered, "Nara." Her voice was soft, musical, edged with exhaustion but not broken. Jackson nodded. "That's a good name, Nara." She glanced at him, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. They spent the night beneath a canopy of stars, Jackson awake and alert, while Nara finally slept, curled in his coat like a fragile, wounded bird. He kept the fire alive and his rifle close, but his thoughts wandered places he hadn't visited in years. She had been alone. Hurt. Terrified. But she'd fought for her life with everything she had. That kind of spirit stayed with a man. When morning came, the desert was washed in pale gold. Nara stood, clutching the coat around her shoulders. She looked east, toward a distant ridge line. "My home, 2 days from here," she said. "Will you take me?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "Yes." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. They rode side by side, though she spoke little and looked even less. Still, he could feel something shifting between them, an unspoken connection threaded through silence and shared breath. She told him only what was necessary. She was the daughter of a respected shaman. She'd been gathering healing herbs alone when the trappers caught her. Her tribe did not often welcome outsiders. "That's fine," Jackson murmured. "I'm just getting you home safe. That's all." But he wasn't so sure that was all. 2 days passed in uneasy peace. She healed slowly. He protected her from the midday sun, shared his water when hers ran low, and learned the cadence of her presence, quiet but strong, reserved but burning beneath the surface. On the afternoon of the second day, they crested a hill and saw her village in a valley carved with tall pines and red rock. Smoke curled from several lodges. Children played near the riverbank. Women worked hides in the shade. But as soon as they approached, warriors materialized like ghosts from the trees and boulders. Spears ready. Arrows drawn. Jackson stopped his horse, hands visible, ready to fight if he had to, but hoping he wouldn't. Nara raised her hand and spoke rapidly in her native tongue. The warriors hesitated but did not lower their weapons. Then the crowd parted for an elder whose presence was unmistakable. A tall man draped in a cloak of feathers and polished bone, face lined with decades of battles and blessings. Nara approached him, speaking urgently. Jackson couldn't understand a word, but he understood the tone. Pain. Relief. Respect. Something sacred. The elder listened, occasionally glancing at Jackson. Then he stepped forward. "You saved my daughter's life," he said in slow, deliberate English. "You brought her home with honor. The spirits have chosen you." Jackson stiffened. "Chosen me for what?" The elder lifted a feather streaked with red paint and placed it in Jackson's hand. "You are now her sacred husband." Jackson blinked. His heart kicked hard in his chest. "I didn't ask for that," he muttered. "I was just—" "And that," the elder said, "is why the spirits chose you." Nara stood behind her father, silent, for once not looking away from Jackson. Something in her gaze had changed. The warriors finally lowered their weapons. Drums began to beat softly somewhere in the village. Children approached with awed whispers. And Jackson Crow, man without a home, man running from himself, stood at the center of a people who now claimed him. But he had barely begun to understand what that meant. That night they gave him a place near Nara's family lodge. He sat by the fire, staring at the feather in his hand, wondering what fate had just wrapped around him. He had always believed his life was meant to be small, short, solitary. Now the world seemed to say otherwise. In the days that followed, he became part of the village's rhythm, not fully, not yet, but enough that people nodded when he passed. Enough that children approached him without fear. Enough that Nera stayed near him, offering quiet company beneath the cottonwood trees or by the river's edge. One evening, while the sun melted into the horizon, they sat by the rushing water. Jackson tossed a rock into the river. "You believe in this sacred bond they talk about?" he asked. Nera plucked a flower and held it gently. "I believe the spirit ties two people only when it is true." He looked at her carefully. "You think it tied us?" She met his gaze. "You would not still be here if you did not feel something too." He didn't have an answer. Not one he understood well enough to speak. But before he could say more, the night split open with danger. 6 riders emerged from the treeline, hard men, bounty hunters with eyes like knives and dust-covered coats hiding pistols and rifles. Jackson knew their kind instantly. Their leader, a scar-cheeked brute named Briggs Harrow, called out, "Jackson Crow! You're wanted in Texas for murder! Step out or we'll burn this whole place to the damn ground!" Behind Jackson, warriors readied bows and spears. But before the first arrow flew, Jackson stepped forward. "I'll go," he said. "No need for anyone to die for me." Nera's voice rang sharp. "No." She stepped in front of him. "If you take him, you make war with us." Harrow spat. "We don't fear Apache." The shaman, Nera's father, stepped forward, eyes glowing like embers. "Then you are fools." The air grew heavy. The ground seemed to pulse. Harrow hesitated. Jackson did not. In one fluid motion he lunged, grabbed a rifle, and fired. Chaos erupted. Warriors surged like shadows. Arrows flew. Gunshots split the night. Screams tore through the smoke. Jackson fought like a man who finally had something worth dying for. When the last echoes faded, 4 bounty hunters lay dead. 2 fled into the darkness. The village stood intact. Nera walked to Jackson slowly. Pride, relief, something deeper burning in her gaze. "You did not run," she whispered. He breathed hard. "Not anymore." The shaman approached, placing a hand on Jackson's shoulder. "No," he said. "You are truly hers." And for the first time in years, Jackson didn't feel lost. He felt found. The days that followed carried the weight of something new, something Jackson had never allowed himself to feel. Not fully. Not openly. The village moved around him with a quiet harmony, like a living organism made of firelight, river song, and summer wind. He'd never known a place that breathed like this, where every sound and every silence seemed carved with meaning. It unsettled him at first, the way time slowed here. Nothing of the rushed, vicious world he'd come from. No saloons thick with smoke, no men ready to stab each other over spilled whiskey, no lawmen tracking him like a wolf trailing blood. Here, he woke each morning to sun-warmed air and the rustle of pines. The women ground corn and herbs, their laughter light and unguarded. The men prepared for hunts or patrolled the borders of their land with silent vigilance. Children splashed in the river or played games with stones and small painted sticks, their joy echoing across the valley. And Nera, she moved through it all with a grace that made the rest of the world seem clumsy by comparison. She was always near him. Not hovering. Not clinging. Just present, like a shadow tied to his breath. Sometimes she spoke, more often she didn't. But silence between them was never empty. It was thick with things neither of them had the courage yet to name. On the 6th morning, Jackson helped repair a corral near the village's edge. The sun was already high when Nera approached carrying a basket of water-soaked cloth. She set it down beside him, her eyes warm but questioning. "You work too much," she said softly. Jackson wiped sweat from his brow. "Work keeps a man useful." Her gaze lingered on him. "You do not need to prove yourself here." He paused at that. The words struck something raw and unfamiliar inside him. The ride that followed felt longer than any distance Jesse had crossed in years, not because the terrain was difficult, but because every word, every breath shared between them carried weight. The heat of the day settled into a heavy gold that draped over the land like a thick blanket, and the desert wind came warm and slow, brushing against their faces with the dry smell of dust and mesquite. For miles they spoke little. They didn't have to. There was a comfort between them now, an unspoken understanding neither had asked for yet somehow depended on. At times, when the sun shifted lower and bled through the horizon, Jessie stole glances at her. Not out of need, or curiosity alone, but because something in her expression seemed worth studying. The way her gaze traveled across the landscape, quiet, alert, solemn, the way she carried herself on horseback, with an elegance that didn't weaken her toughness but added to it, the way her hair moved with the wind like black silk with fire caught at the ends. He found himself watching more than he should have, and catching himself each time. She noticed once or twice, but didn't say anything. Her eyes flicked toward him, lingering for a breath, then returning forward as if acknowledging something without choosing to name it. When they stopped by a narrow stream that cut a silver curve through the dust, Jessie dismounted first. The horses dipped their muzzles into the water. The sky dimmed to a bruised orange streaked with violet. A warm breeze carried the scent of sage and distant wood smoke, maybe from a camp miles away. Jessie crouched by the water, cupping some in his calloused hands to drink. The coolness shocked through his body, refreshing despite the heat still clinging to his clothes. She remained mounted for a moment longer, scanning the horizon. After a long pause, she finally slid off the horse with a slow grace that seemed instinctive, not practiced. She approached the stream and knelt beside him, not too close, but not far either. "You look tired," she said quietly. He shook his head. "Seen worse days." She dipped her fingers into the water, letting it trickle over her skin. For the first time since they'd met, he saw her expression soften fully. The fight, the fear, the guardedness, they were still there, of course, but beneath them lived a gentler person. Someone capable of warmth. "You were alone for a long time before I found you," Jessie said. It wasn't a question, but an observation. She nodded. "Too long. What kept you going?" She stared at the water, watching the surface ripple. "My mother used to say that the land remembers those who walk it with respect. Even when others try to erase us, the land does not forget." Her voice trembled slightly. "I thought, if I kept walking, maybe it would take me home again." Jessie's throat tightened. Not out of pity, she would have despised that, but out of recognition. He knew what it was like to walk with no home to walk toward. "You ain't alone now," he said. "Not while I'm here." She looked up at him slowly. Her eyes held a glimmer of something fragile but growing. Trust, maybe? Or the beginnings of it. The wind shifted. She shivered despite the warm air. Jessie removed his coat, heavy, worn, travel-stained, and draped it around her shoulders without a word. She hesitated only a moment before pulling it tighter around herself. The gesture seemed to surprise her, the softness of it, the simplicity. Her gaze lingered on him a bit longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered. They camped there for the night, the stream murmuring beside them like a low lullaby. Jessie built a small fire, just enough to keep them warm and warn off curious animals. The flames flickered orange over their faces, casting shadows that swayed like ghosts across the rocks and brush. She sat cross-legged across from him, watching the firelight twist and dance. Jessie leaned back against a fallen log, stretching out his legs. For a while they ate quietly, jerky, dried berries, a bit of cornbread Jessie had traded for days earlier. Nothing special, but enough. After they ate, she spoke again. "My tribe used to tell stories around fires like this. Stories of warriors, and hunters, and spirits that protected those who showed courage." Her eyes drifted to the flames. "I wonder if any of those spirits watched over me that day, when you saved me." Jessie didn't know what to say at first. Compliments never sat well with him. But this wasn't pride speaking. This was gratitude, offered carefully, placed like something delicate into his hands. "Maybe they did," Jessie said. "Or maybe they just sent me rollin' into trouble like usual." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Then I'm glad trouble found you." He chuckled softly. That's a first. The fire continued crackling. The warmth reached them both, but the air between them still carried a tension that wasn't discomfort, it was something else. Something neither of them tried to push away. Why were those men after you? Jessie asked, finally voicing the question he'd held back. Her smile faded. They murdered my brother, she said quietly. He fought them to protect me. They chased me for days after that. She swallowed hard. I thought they'd never stop. Jessie felt a hard knot form in his chest. Rage simmered low and steady at the thought of what she'd gone through. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. They won't trouble you again, he said. Not while I'm here. I mean that. She held his gaze for a long moment, as if searching for weakness or uncertainty in his words. She found none. You're different from other white men I've known, she said. Hope that's a good thing. It is. She folded her hands in her lap. Most who cross our people only take. But you gave something back today. What did I give? Safety, she said. And respect. Jessie looked away, suddenly uneasy with the weight of her sincerity. Ain't much. Just something a man ought to do. Many don't. The fire popped. Sparks spiraled upward, vanishing into the dark. After a while she moved closer, not touching him, but closer than before. The space between them shrank, warmed by something other than the fire. Tell me about your life, she murmured. He huffed out a breath. Ain't much to tell. Spent most of it runnin' from trouble, or huntin' men who weren't worth the bullets it took to stop 'em. Why? Because I'm good at it, he said. Or was. And because the West don't give men like me many choices. She considered that. Everyone has a choice. Jessie shook his head. Not always. Then you have one now, she said quietly. What will you choose to be? He stared into the flames. The question lodged itself deep inside him, unsettling something he'd kept buried for years. He wasn't used to thinking about the kind of man he wanted to be. Only the kind he had to be to survive. I don't know, he admitted. Her voice softened. Maybe you'll find the answer out here. The land can be cruel, but it can heal too. Jessie didn't respond. But he felt her words burrow into him, gentle yet persistent. The night grew darker. A coyote cried somewhere in the distance, long and low. The heat of the day faded into a cooler breeze that brushed their faces. They were quiet for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts, yet strangely comforted by the other's presence. Eventually she lay down near the fire, wrapped in his coat. Jessie watched her eyelids flutter, her breathing slow. She fought sleep for a while. She'd spent too long fearing the night, but exhaustion finally claimed her. Her hair lay scattered across the ground like ink on parchment. Jessie, still sitting upright, kept watch. Not because he didn't trust the land, but because he didn't want anything, man or beast or ghost, to come near her. He listened to her breathing. Slow. Even. Peaceful. It had been a long time since he'd sat beside someone sleeping peacefully. Hours slipped by like drifting sand. The fire dwindled. The stars brightened. The world felt still. At some point, without thinking, Jessie reached out and carefully adjusted the coat around her shoulders, making sure she stayed warm. His fingers hovered a moment longer than necessary above her arm, close enough to feel the heat of her skin, but not touching. He pulled back. He wasn't sure what frightened him more, the dangers they'd escaped, or the feelings creeping into the quiet spaces of his heart. By dawn she stirred. Her eyes blinked open slowly, adjusting to the pale blue light of morning. When she saw him still sitting there, awake, she frowned slightly. You didn't sleep. I slept enough. You stayed awake to watch over me. Maybe. Her expression warmed. Thank you? He shrugged, unable to meet her eyes. Didn't want any coyotes making off with my coat. She laughed softly, the sound gentle and melodic in the morning air. Of course. They broke camp quickly, sharing the last of the cornbread and filling their canteens. As they saddled the horses, the sun crept higher, spilling gold across the landscape. Everything felt fresh and filled with promise. "Where will we go?" she asked. "Where do you want to go?" She thought for a moment. "Somewhere peaceful." Jesse nodded. "Then I'll take you there." They mounted up and rode again, side by side as the land stretched endlessly before them. Red earth, shimmering horizon, scattered brush catching sunlight like tiny lanterns. The heat climbed steadily as morning edged toward noon. After a few miles she spoke again. "What will you do when you leave me somewhere safe?" Jesse hesitated. "Hadn't thought that far ahead." "You could come with me," she said softly. He looked over at her. "You sure you want someone like me around?" She held his gaze without flinching. "Yes." Jesse's heartbeat stumbled. But before he could answer, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from the earth. Hooves. Fast. Numerous. She stiffened, eyes widening. Jesse cursed under his breath and grabbed his rifle. Riders swept over the rise in the distance. 5, maybe 6, moving fast, kicking up dust behind them like a storm. Their dark silhouettes grew clearer with every second. Hired hands. Bounty hunters. Someone wanting revenge for the men Jesse had killed. Or worse, someone wanting her back. Jesse pulled his horse sharply to the side, motioning for her to follow. They rode hard, pushing the animals to full speed as the ground trembled beneath the thunder of pursuit. "They're gaining!" she shouted. "Hold tight!" The desert blurred around them. Wind tore at their clothes. Sweat stung Jesse's eyes. But he didn't slow. Couldn't. Not with danger clawing at their heels. Shots cracked in the distance, sharp, echoing. Bullets kicked up dirt around them. One zipped past Jesse's shoulder close enough to make him flinch. "We need cover!" she yelled. He scanned the terrain ahead, rocks, ravines, brush. Nothing substantial. But then he saw it, a narrow canyon split into the side of a ridge like a jagged wound. "This way!" They veered toward it, hooves pounding across the hot earth. As they neared the canyon entrance, Jesse swung around in the saddle, firing a shot behind them. One of the riders jerked, slumping sideways before falling from his horse. The others scattered briefly, regrouping. They reached the mouth of the canyon and ducked inside. Shadows swallowed them. The walls rose high and narrow, offering some protection from bullets. But it was a dead-end canyon. He knew it the moment they entered. She did too. "There's no way out," she whispered. Jesse dismounted, yanking his rifle free. "I know." The riders slowed at the entrance, blocking any escape. Dust settled around them in a thick haze. She dismounted too, stepping close enough that their shoulders brushed. "What do we do?" Jesse chambered another round. "We make our stand. I reckon I don't know how to be anywhere I ain't proven myself." Nara's expression softened. "You are safe now. No man here doubts your worth." He swallowed, unsure what to say. Safety wasn't a thing he trusted. Safety was the lie a man lived in the moment before a bullet found him. But Nara believed it. And some part of him wanted to believe her too. Later that day, the shaman summoned him. Jackson entered the elder's lodge with a mixture of caution and respect. Smoke curled from a fire pit, carrying the scent of sage and sweetgrass. Painted animal hides hung along the walls, telling stories older than memory. "You walk with a burden," the shaman said, studying him with calm, sharp eyes. Jackson sat stiffly. "Hard to walk without one." The shaman nodded. "A man becomes heavy when he carries ghosts. Yours follow you like a storm." Jackson exhaled slowly. "I killed men. Some deserved it. Some maybe didn't. I ran from the law. I ran from my own blood. I don't know what kind of man that makes me in your eyes." The shaman lifted a carved wooden bowl, filled with river water and black volcanic sand. "You are the man who saved my daughter," he said. "And a man the spirits have bound to her path. What you were before does not rule what you may become." Jackson looked down at his hands, scarred, calloused, shaped by violence. "You really think a man like me can start fresh?" "I think," the shaman said softly, A man becomes himself only once he stops running. Jackson didn't answer, but the truth in those words settled in him like a stone dropped into deep water. When he stepped out of the lodge, the air felt lighter. A breeze moved through the grass, warm and fragrant. Nera stood a short distance away, as though waiting without admitting she had been waiting. Her hair stirred in the wind, catching the sunlight. She watched him with quiet steadiness. "Are you still troubled?" she asked. "Maybe less than I was a minute ago," he murmured. They walked together along the river bank as evening settled over the valley. The horizon glowed red, then violet. Jackson skipped a flat stone across the water, its ripples trembling outward. "You ever think about what your life might have been if today was different?" he asked. Nera glanced at him. "Different how?" "If I hadn't been there. If you hadn't screamed." He cleared his throat. "If the world had turned wrong instead of right." She considered his words, then shook her head. "The world turns as it must. The spirits put you in my path." Her gaze softened. "I would not be alive if you had not come." Jackson exhaled, struggling with the weight of what he hadn't allowed himself to say. "I'm glad I was." Nera reached out, brushing her fingers against his hand. Lightly. Tentatively. His breath caught, though he didn't pull away. Her hand was warm, her touch gentle but certain. "When you first saw me," she said quietly, "were you afraid?" "Afraid?" He frowned. "No." She tilted her head. "Most men fear my people. I ain't most men." "No," she said with a small smile. "You are not." They stood there until the sky turned black and stars spilled across it like scattered embers. That night, Jackson awoke to the sound of distant drumming, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. He rose from his bedroll near the fire and stepped outside. The village was awake, lit by torches and moonlight. Men and women gathered in a slow-moving circle, singing a low, steady chant. Warriors painted with ochre and white stood watch along the outer ring. Nera saw him and approached. "It is the ceremony of renewal," she explained. "A blessing for the land. For the people. For those who have come into our circle." Jackson hesitated. "I ain't sure I belong in any ceremony." She touched his arm gently. "You do now." They joined the outer circle. The drumbeats pulsed like a heartbeat beneath the earth. Nera's hair shimmered in the firelight. Her face was calm, illuminated by flickering amber. At one point, she took his hand without looking at him. Her fingers laced with his naturally, as though they had always known the shape of him. He felt something shift inside, not sudden, not loud, but deep. Like the beginning of a promise. As the ceremony ended and people drifted away, Nera turned to him quietly. "You fight to protect us," she said. "Even when you think you do not belong. That is why the spirits chose you. Not for your past, but for your heart." He swallowed, unsure how to respond. No one had spoken of his heart in years. Most days, he wasn't sure he had one left. "I ain't used to being needed," he said. "You are needed," she whispered. "By me." The words settled between them like warm earth. But the West never allowed peace for long. 3 days later, scouts returned with news. The 2 bounty hunters who had escaped were heading south toward a nearby mining settlement. They were spreading word about Jackson Crow, his crimes, his bounty, and the location of the Apache village harboring him. And worse, a group of mercenaries out of Prescott had been hired to bring him in dead or alive. The shaman gathered the warriors in the center of the village. Dust swirled around their feet as he addressed them. "These men do not seek justice. They seek blood. They come to destroy what we protect." Jackson stepped forward. "This is my fight. I brought this trouble. I'll settle it." Nera's eyes widened with quiet fear. "Alone? I won't risk your people," he said firmly. But Nera stepped in front of him, her voice trembling not with fear but with fire. "You are part of this people now. Your fight is our fight." The shaman nodded slowly. "You carry our bond. And you carry my daughter's life in your hands. We stand with you." Jackson clenched his jaw, torn between gratitude and guilt. He didn't want anyone to die for him. Not after all he'd done. Not after all he'd failed at. But the mercenaries were coming. And the desert had already begun whispering warnings in its hot summer wind. War was on its way. That night, Jackson sat alone on a tall ridge overlooking the valley. The moon hung like a cold coin in the sky. He stared at the land stretched before him, the pines, the river, the lodges glowing softly in the night. He didn't know how to protect this place. But he knew he had to try. Footsteps approached behind him. Nera sat beside him without speaking. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her hair stirring in the gentle breeze. "You leave tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have to," Jackson murmured. "If I stay, those men'll bring hell to your people." Her eyes glimmered in the moonlight. "You think we cannot defend our home? I think I won't let you bleed for my sins." She took his hand again. Firmer this time. Her grip steady, unafraid. "You carry no sin for saving me." He closed his eyes. "You're the one thing in this world I can't lose," he whispered. Nera inhaled sharply. He felt her hand tremble in his. "You will not," she said softly. "But if you must go, I will go with you." Jackson turned sharply. "No. Nera, you can't. Your father, your people. I choose my path," she said, voice firm as stone. "And the spirits chose you for me. That does not break because men with guns ride in the night." He felt his heart stutter. She leaned closer, her forehead brushing his. "I walk with you," she whispered. "Wherever the world turns." His breath hitched. "Nera, I am not afraid." He was. He had faced guns, war, and death without blinking. But the thought of losing her, that terrified him in a way nothing else ever had. The ridge wind blew gently between them, carrying the scent of pine and river water. When she finally rested her head against his shoulder, Jackson closed his eyes and let the moment carve itself into his bones. Tomorrow would bring blood. But tonight there was only her. The canyon walls pressed tight around them, towering slabs of red stone that glowed faintly under the harsh summer sun. The heat clung to the air in a suffocating stillness, broken only by the rhythmic snorts of the horses and the faint echo of shifting gravel beneath boot heels. Jesse planted his feet firmly in the dirt, rifle braced against his shoulder, eyes narrowed at the figures gathering at the canyon mouth. 5 riders remained. Their silhouettes shifted through the shimmering haze, men hardened by the west, faces obscured beneath wide brims, guns glinting in their hands. One spat into the dust, the sound carrying like a crack of thunder through the narrow stone throat of the canyon. "Looks like you cornered yourself, boy," a voice called, rough and dripping with false confidence. "And you got that girl with you. Mighty foolish of you both." Jesse didn't answer. Words wouldn't change anything now. He shifted his weight, adjusting the rifle grip, letting his breathing slow into the steady rhythm he'd learned long ago. Beside him, she stood poised but tense, her eyes darting across the attackers' positions. No fear showed in her stance, only readiness. One rider nudged his horse forward, weapon raised. "Last chance, cowboy. Hand her over, and maybe we let you crawl away." Jesse's jaw tightened. "Not a chance in hell." The reply triggered a laugh from one of the others. "We'll see." The attack came fast. Gunfire erupted in a sudden burst, ricocheting off the canyon walls and filling the air with a storm of sound. Jesse dropped to one knee and fired back, the recoil slamming into his shoulder. A rider fell sideways with a grunt, tumbling from his saddle in a burst of dust. The others scattered briefly, then regrouped, bullets slicing through the air with deadly precision. She crouched beside him, drawing a small knife from her boot. It wasn't much against guns, but she gripped it with certainty, her movements sharp and deliberate. "Stay low," Jesse said through clenched teeth. "I'm not leaving you." She shot back. A bullet pinged off the stone inches from her head. She flinched but didn't retreat. Jesse fired again, hitting another rider's horse. The animal reared, screaming as it stumbled backward. The rider toppled to the ground, hitting hard. Jesse didn't wait, He fired again, and the man went still. 3 left. The canyon filled with dust and smoke. The remaining riders spread out, trying to find angles. One slid off his horse and took cover behind a boulder near the entrance. Another stayed mounted, circling like a vulture. The third, likely their leader, sat tall in his saddle, watching with cold calculation. "Girl ain't worth dying for, Outlaw," the leader called. "She is to me," Jesse shouted back without thinking. The words slipped out raw and unfiltered. She looked at him sharply, something flickering behind her eyes. But there was no time to dwell on it. Gunfire cracked again. Jesse grabbed her wrist and pulled her behind a jutting stone ledge as bullets rained down, pulverizing gravel into stinging fragments. She pressed close beside him, breath fast, chest rising and falling hard. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "You sure?" "Yes." He peeked around the edge of the rock. The leader was dismounting now, moving with the deliberate confidence of someone who'd killed more men than he'd bothered to remember. Jesse recognized that look. He'd seen it in mirrors once upon a time. The man barked an order to the remaining 2. They moved to flank, one climbing a nearby rock formation, the other keeping low and advancing behind a fallen log. Jesse cursed under his breath. They were being boxed in. He turned to her. "When I say run, you run." She shook her head violently. "No. It ain't negotiable. You saved me," she said fiercely. "I will not leave you." A bullet cracked against the rock inches from Jesse's cheek, sending shards spraying across his skin. He winced, blood trickling from a shallow cut. She reached for him, brushing the blood with her thumb, but he pulled back quickly. "I'll be fine. Stay focused." He checked his ammunition, dangerously low. 2 rounds left in the rifle. A handful of bullets in his revolver. Not nearly enough. He leaned around the rock and fired one of his last shots at the man climbing the ridge. The bullet clipped the attacker's shoulder, spinning him off balance. He tumbled down the rock face with a guttural cry, landing hard and unmoving. 2 left. But the leader was close now. Jesse could hear the crunch of his boots approaching, slow and steady, like a wolf savoring the cornered prey. The second rider moved in tandem with him, flanking along the opposite side. Jesse's heart hammered. The heat, the dust, the danger, it all pressed in tight, suffocating. But through it all, she remained at his side, refusing to abandon him, even as death closed in around them. The leader's voice echoed through the canyon. "I ain't gonna kill you quick, boy. You took my men. That needs settling slow." Jesse waited. Still. Silent. Listening for footsteps. Waiting for the opening. Then, in a flash of instinct born from years of surviving the worst men the West produced, he grabbed her arm. "Run!" She hesitated only a fraction of a second, long enough for him to see the war inside her, but then she nodded. They sprinted deeper into the canyon, boots pounding against the hard-packed earth. Gunfire exploded behind them, bullets screaming past. Jesse pushed her ahead, using his body as a shield as they raced for a narrow split in the rock he'd spotted earlier, a tight crevice barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. "This way!" She ducked into the opening, turning sideways to slip through. Jesse followed, scraping his arms against the rough stone. The crevice twisted sharply before opening into a hidden hollow, a small basin surrounded by high walls, sheltered from view. "Stay behind me," Jesse said, panting hard. Before she could answer, the leader's voice came booming through the rocks. "You think you can hide in there?" Jesse raised his revolver, his breath steadying. The canyon's acoustics bounced every sound around, making it hard to pinpoint exact positions. But he listened closely, using that hunter's instinct sharpened over years of survival. The leader stepped into the crevice. Jesse fired. The shot struck the rock beside the man's head, close enough to make him duck and curse. Dust rained down. Jesse fired again, forcing him back. But that was his last bullet. He holstered the empty gun and braced himself as the leader emerged again, revolver in hand, eyes burning with hatred. "You're out of bullets, Outlaw." "Maybe. Then this ends now." The man lunged forward. Jesse tackled him, both crashing to the ground with a force that shook dust from the canyon walls. The leader swung first, a brutal punch to Jesse's ribs that sent a shockwave of pain through his side. Jesse retaliated with a hard elbow to the man's jaw, the crack echoing sharply. They grappled violently, rolling across the dirt. The man was strong, bigger, heavier. He pinned Jesse, drawing a knife with his free hand. She screamed Jesse's name. The blade flashed downward. Jesse caught the man's wrist mid-strike, muscles burning as he strained to hold the blade back. The leader snarled, spitting blood onto Jesse's face. "You're gonna die here, boy!" Jesse felt his grip slipping. His strength waned. The knife edged closer, gleaming inches from his throat. Then she was there. She leapt onto the leader's back, her arms wrapping around his neck in a fierce chokehold. The man roared, thrashing violently. Jesse twisted, using the distraction to rip the knife from the attacker's hand and shove him off balance. The knife skidded across the ground. The leader threw her off with a brutal motion, sending her crashing onto the dirt. Jesse felt something snap inside him, not fear, not panic, but a fury hotter than any fire he'd ever stood beside. "You shouldn't have touched her." He lunged. The fight was short and violent. Jesse slammed the man against the canyon wall, driving his fist into the attacker's jaw with a force that rattled bone. Blow after blow landed, fueled by adrenaline, anger, and something deeper, something protective and desperate and raw. The leader tried to swing back, but Jesse caught his wrist and twisted sharply. A sickening crack tore through the air. The man screamed. Jesse didn't stop. With a final, brutal strike, the leader collapsed to the ground, unmoving. Silence swallowed the canyon. Jesse stood trembling, bloodied and bruised, chest heaving. The dust settled slowly around him like drifting ash. She pushed herself to her knees, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Jesse!" He turned to her immediately, crossing the space between them in 2 quick strides. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, though pain flickered in her expression. "Just shaken." He knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly before finally resting gently on her shoulders. His voice dropped to a low, shaken whisper. "Don't you ever scare me like that again. I wasn't going to let him kill you." He exhaled shakily, brushing dirt from her cheek. His thumb lingered a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes locked, her gaze still wild from the fight, his still burning from the protectiveness that had nearly consumed him. He swallowed hard. "We're alive. That's what matters." She nodded slowly, her breath evening as her fear faded. Then the canyon fell into a hush so deep that Jesse could hear both their heartbeats, his pounding heavy, hers beating fast but steady. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. They stood close, closer than before, close enough that the heat of their bodies blended with the heat of the canyon air. She whispered, "We should leave." "Yeah," he murmured. "Let's get out of here." They retrieved the horses, mounted up, and rode away from the canyon without looking back. The bodies left behind would be reclaimed by the land soon enough. The West didn't care much for names or burials, not for men like those. The heat of the day had grown oppressive again, but Jesse barely felt it. His mind replayed the fight in fragments, the blade, the dust, the moment she jumped in to save him. Most men he'd met wouldn't have done that for him. No one had ever done it without expecting something in return. As the canyon disappeared behind them, the land opened once more into wide stretches of dust and golden sun. They rode side by side, silent but no longer tense. After several miles, she finally broke the quiet. "You could have died. You could have too." She glanced over at him. "Would you be sad if I had?" The question hit him harder than any punch he'd taken that day. Jesse stared ahead at the shimmering horizon. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Yeah, I would." She studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read, soft, searching, touched with something tender. "I'm glad you're alive," she said. He nodded once, unable to speak. They rode until the sun dipped low, turning the land into a wash of molten gold and deep shadow. The heat eased into a warm evening breeze. The sky stretched wide and endless, pink at the edges, fading to indigo above. At last, she pointed toward a distant rise where scattered pines gathered like dark brushstrokes against the horizon. There, she said. A good place to rest. Jessie followed her lead, guiding the horse up the gentle slope. At the top they found a sheltered hollow surrounded by pines and large stones, protected, quiet, safe. He dismounted first, then helped her down. When her boots touched the earth, she didn't let go of his hand right away. She held it for a heartbeat longer, her fingers lightly curled around his. Then she released him, though her eyes held what her hand no longer did. They set up a small camp again, the twilight settling around them like a soft blanket. The air smelled of pine sap and warm earth. The world felt calmer now, as though the land itself had granted them a moment's peace after the violence of the canyon. Jessie built a fire, and she sat close beside him, much closer than before. Her knee brushed his lightly, and she didn't move away. Neither did he. The flames rose, casting a warm glow across her face. Bruises had begun to form along her arms, faint but visible. Jessie reached out, gently brushing his fingers over one. "You sure you're not hurt worse than you're saying?" he asked. She shook her head. "Nothing I can't handle. You were brave back there. You were braver." He huffed a soft laugh. "Don't know about that." "I do," she whispered. Her voice carried something new, something that tightened Jessie's chest in a way bullets never had. She shifted closer, the firelight catching in her dark eyes. "You saved me again. You saved me first," he said. They sat in silence, the fire crackling softly beside them. The night hummed with cicadas, and the wind rustled through the pines. The world felt smaller, wrapped around just the two of them. At some point she leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Jessie froze, breath caught. Then slowly, cautiously, he let his arm settle around her back, drawing her closer. She exhaled softly, as though she'd been waiting for that. They stayed like that for a long, quiet stretch of time, the fire flickering and the desert night unfolding around them like a vast, star-strewn blanket. But Jessie knew the West wasn't done with them yet. Peace never lasted long out here. The desert wind had quieted to a low, steady breath by the time dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in pale orange and dusty rose. Caleb lay awake long before the light found him. He wasn't sure whether it was the soreness in his back from sleeping on bare earth, the ache in his shoulder, or the uneasy thoughts circling in his mind that had kept him from rest. Maybe it was all three. Either way, he quietly eased himself up, careful not to disturb Nara, who slept no more than an arm's reach away. She lay curled slightly toward the fire's dying embers, wrapped in the woven Apache blanket she'd spread the night before. Her hair, black as obsidian and untamed from the dusty ride, spilled partly over her cheek. For a moment, Caleb's breath caught, not because of beauty alone, though she certainly had it in a rare and quiet way, but because of the strange familiarity growing inside him. He had known her no more than a day, and yet something about watching her sleep under the wide western sky felt natural, as though he'd done it 1,000 times. He forced himself to look away. He had no business thinking like that. Not now. Not with danger closing in behind them and nothing certain ahead. Caleb rose to his feet, joints protesting, and limped toward his horse. The gelding stood tethered to a scrubby mesquite tree, patiently gnawing at a clump of dry grass. Caleb checked the cinch, ran a hand along the horse's flank, then turned and scanned the desert. Just silhouettes of jagged stone outcrops and scattered brush. No dust trails. No riders. Not yet. Behind him, he heard soft movement. Nara sat up, rubbing her eyes gently before pushing her hair behind her shoulder. "You slept?" Caleb asked without looking back. "A little," she answered, her voice low from the morning chill. "You?" "Enough." He didn't elaborate. She didn't press. It was an unspoken courtesy that had formed between them in the short time since their paths collided. She gathered her things and walked to him, offering a small cactus fruit she must have sliced open earlier. "For the morning," she said simply. "Thank you," he replied, taking it, the the sweetness of it a small mercy against the dryness gripping his mouth. They shared a quiet moment, each looking out across the sun-touched plain. Far off, the mountains rose like sleeping beasts. Nara's gaze lingered on them a beat longer. "My people live beyond those ridges," she said. "Past the creek that cuts through the black stone. It is still far." "How far?" Caleb asked. "A day and a half by horse." She looked at his shoulder then, the way he held it tighter than he meant to. "If you can ride that long." "I'll manage," he said. She didn't argue, though her expression betrayed doubt. They mounted soon after, the air growing warm as the sun climbed higher. Caleb's wound throbbed with the horse's rhythm, but he grit his teeth and pushed through it. The trail ahead wound between rolling dunes and tall stone pillars shaped by centuries of wind. The sky overhead was endless, open, unforgiving, and honest. Nara rode slightly ahead, guiding them along narrow paths that only someone born in this land would know. Caleb followed, grateful for her knowledge, though he kept glancing behind them, expecting at any moment to see pursuers crest a hill. Hours passed in slow, deliberate travel. They spoke only when needed, partly from caution, partly because the desert swallow's sound makes words feel small. But as the sun reached its height, Nara finally broke the silence. "You never told me why they hunt you." Her tone wasn't accusing, just calm curiosity. Caleb exhaled through his nose. "Maybe because I'm unlucky." She gave him a brief look that said she didn't believe that for a second. He sighed. "I used to ride with a man named Hollis. A rancher with more ambition than good sense. He had a way of convincing men to follow him. Promise we were doing honest work. Protecting land. Keeping order." He paused. "It was all lies." "What happened?" "He turned outlaw and dragged us with him. Robberies. Threats. The kind of things a decent man shouldn't be part of." "And you?" she asked softly. "I was decent once," Caleb said, jaw tightening. "Or I tried to be." Nara let the quiet settle for a moment. "But you left them." "Not soon enough," he muttered. They continued riding, the weight of his confession hanging between them but not heavy in a cruel way, more like something she understood instinctively. After a while she said, "A man is not only what he did before. He is what he chooses now." Caleb looked at her with a small, disbelieving huff of breath. "You speak like someone who knows things." She shrugged. "I listen." He almost smiled. Almost. The afternoon dragged on, hot and relentless. But miles ahead, something began to change. The terrain dipped sharply, the sand giving way to flat, cracked earth. Thin lines of green peeked through dry soil. Caleb slowed his horse. "What is this place?" Nara pointed. "The old wash. There is water beneath, not far. Enough for the horses." As they rode closer, the faint sound of trickling water reached their ears. A narrow stream, barely the width of a sash, snaked between the rocks, clear, cold, and alive. They dismounted beside it. Caleb knelt to cup water into his mouth. It tasted colder than he expected, sharp and refreshing. He splashed some on his face, feeling the grit loosen from his skin. Nara walked a few yards upstream and crouched beside a cluster of smooth stones. She touched them gently, as though greeting an old friend. "This place is sacred to my people," she said quietly. "We stop here on long journeys. The water is strong. It remembers." Caleb didn't know water could remember anything, but he didn't say so. Instead, he sat back, letting the shade of a leaning boulder give him a brief rest. "You grew up out here?" he asked. "Yes," she replied. "I ran on this ground when I was a child. Learned to track deer. Learned the songs of the night." Her voice softened. "I did not think I would see this place again so soon." "You thought you wouldn't make it back," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Not alone." The words hit him harder than expected. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The meaning was woven into her tone, her posture, the way she watched him with a kind of quiet steadiness that made him uncomfortable only because it felt so trusting. Caleb cleared his throat. We should keep moving before the sun drops too low. She nodded. They mounted once more and followed the waterway until it curved eastward into shadow. The land rose again, leading them toward the ridge Nara had spoken of at dawn. But as they approached the base of the ridge, something made her stop abruptly, hand raised. Caleb froze. What is it? She pointed to the ground. In the dust were faint but unmistakable imprints, horseshoes. Several. Fresh. Caleb's pulse quickened. How many? 4, maybe 5, she said, crouching lower. Ridden fast. Sheriff's men? He asked. She shook her head slowly. Not lawmen. These tracks are too deep. Heavy riders. They carry weapons. Caleb felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Hollis. Or his men. They were close. We need to change direction, he said. No, she replied firmly. If we do, we lose the time we gained. They're heading the same way, Nara. Yes, she said. But they will not catch us if we move through the shaded pass. It is narrow, too narrow for 5 riders. We can slip through. And if they split up? Send 2 ahead? They won't, she said confidently. Not if they don't know this land. He stared at her, weighing her certainty. Finally, he gave a single nod. Lead the way. Nara urged her horse forward, guiding them toward a narrow break between towering slabs of black volcanic rock. The pass was tight enough that Caleb's knees brushed stone on either side. The air cooled instantly, the shadows deep and comforting. You're sure they won't come this way? Caleb asked in a low voice. No one comes through this pass unless they were born here, Nara said. It looks like a dead end to outsiders. They continued slowly, hooves echoing softly off the stone. The air smelled faintly of mineral and coal dust. After several tense minutes, the path opened abruptly into a hidden valley, small, green in places, and dotted with low shrubs. Caleb let out a slow breath. Didn't know anything like this existed out here. There is much you do not know, Nara answered gently. But before he could respond, a sharp crack echoed from somewhere behind them, distant, but unmistakable. A gunshot. Caleb stiffened. Damn. Nara whipped her horse around, eyes scanning the entrance to the pass. They found the tracks we left by the wash. Caleb's jaw tightened. We gotta move. They kicked their horses into motion, racing across the valley floor. The grass whipped against their boots. Caleb didn't look back, he didn't need to. He knew someone was behind them. He felt it in his spine. They reached the far side of the valley where the terrain rose sharply again into a rocky incline. Nara dismounted first, tying her horse to a small cedar trunk. We go up on foot, she said. The horses can climb, but too slow. Caleb followed her lead, though the climb made his shoulder throb with every pull upward. Nara moved quickly and gracefully, like she was made for this kind of ground. Caleb did his best to keep pace. Halfway up, gunfire cracked again, closer this time. The horses below whinnied in panic. Caleb pushed himself harder, grabbing rock after rock, ignoring the fire in his muscles. When they reached the top, they threw themselves behind a large boulder. Caleb risked a glance over the edge. Below, 4 riders entered the valley at full gallop. Their faces weren't clear, but their posture, their movement, he recognized it instantly. Hollis's men, Caleb said under his breath. Nara looked at him. Can they climb fast? No, he said. But they don't have to. As if confirming his fear, one of the riders dismounted and raised a rifle. Caleb ducked as a bullet shattered stone inches from his head. They'll pin us down, he said. We gotta move. Nara grabbed his wrist. Follow me. She led him along a narrow ledge hugging the mountainside. It was barely a foot wide in places. One wrong step and the drop would send them tumbling onto rocks below. Caleb pressed close to the mountain wall, breathing shallowly. You sure this is safe? He whispered. No, she answered. He almost laughed despite the danger. Below them, another shot rang out. Stone fragments sprayed Caleb's arm. Hurry, Nara urged. They scrambled along the ledge until it widened into a sloping path hidden by brush. Nara crouched and pointed. From here, we can reach the high ridge, she said. Once we cross it, my people will not be far. Before Caleb could respond, a terrible sound rose from behind them, a rock slide. He spun just in time to see one of Hollis's men attempting to climb the ledge, only to slip and drag loose a cascade of small boulders. The man screamed as he tumbled down the cliffside, body bouncing violently off jagged stone. The remaining riders below reined their horses back, shouting curses, shaken but not retreating. Nara's face hardened. They will not stop. No, Caleb said. They won't. They pushed onward, climbing higher until the air thinned and the wind cooled again. Caleb's breathing grew ragged, but he forced himself to keep up. He'd come too far to fail now, not with Nara's tribe so close, not with blood still drying on his shirt. After nearly an hour of difficult ascent, they reached the ridge. From its crest, an immense view opened before them, rolling plains stretching endlessly north, golden under the afternoon sun. Nara pointed to the distant horizon. There. Do you see the line of poplars? Caleb squinted. Faintly, yes, thin green specks against the dry land. My people camp near that grove during the summer, she explained. We can reach them by nightfall if we move fast. He nodded. Then we'll make it by nightfall. But before they could begin the descent, a familiar voice rose from below, carried by the wind, sharp, mocking, unmistakably smug. Caleb Boone! Caleb's blood ran cold. He turned slowly toward the echoing call. Hollis. He wasn't in sight yet, but he was there. Somewhere below. Close. Nara looked at Caleb, worry flickering across her face. Is that? Yes, Caleb said, voice low. He found us. Another shout came, louder. You can't run forever, Boone! Caleb steadied his breath. He'd known this moment would come eventually. He'd known he couldn't outrun his past forever. Nara stepped closer to him, her presence grounding, steady. We leave now, she said. If he reaches this ridge, he will have the high ground. Caleb nodded once, gripping his revolver. They began their descent on the opposite side of the ridge, moving quickly but carefully. The path here was loose and steep. Nara took the lead, guiding them through narrow switchbacks. But halfway down, Caleb stumbled, his injured shoulder giving out for a split second. Nara caught his arm, bracing him. You cannot fall, she said sharply. I'm fine, Caleb grunted. You are not, she said, her tone tightening with something like frustration or fear. He held her gaze a moment, breathing hard, then nodded. Just keep going. They continued downward, dust rising around their boots. The sun dipped slightly, turning the sky a deeper, richer gold. Shadows began to stretch across the plains. By the time they reached the lower slope, Caleb's legs were trembling from exertion. Nara paused beside him. We will find water soon, she said. You can rest then. He shook his head. Not until we're with your people. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name, not pity, not admiration, but something softer, more complicated. They pressed on toward the distant grove. But behind them, far above on the ridge they just crossed, a figure finally appeared, silhouetted against the sun like some vengeful specter. Hollis himself. And beside him, 2 remaining riders. Their outlines grew sharper as they surveyed the land below. Nara's jaw tightened. They see us. Caleb's hand moved to his revolver. Let them. No, Nara said quietly. Not here. She pointed to a winding dry riverbed ahead. There. Follow it. It will hide us from their sight. They hurried forward, slipping into the shallow gully. The ground here was cracked and pale, the air cooler. The walls of the riverbed rose just high enough to shield them. For a brief moment, Caleb allowed himself to hope they'd gained enough distance. But then he heard it, the distant rumble of hoofs. Hollis's men were descending fast. Caleb's stomach tightened. We can't outrun horses on foot. No, Nara agreed. But we can make them lose the trail. She scanned the ground quickly, then pointed to a narrow fissure in the rock beside the riverbed. It was tight, nearly invisible, but just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. In there, she said. Caleb stared at it. That gap's barely wide enough to breathe in. She stepped toward it without hesitation. Only if you breathe wrong. He raised a brow despite the danger. Is that an Apache saying? She didn't answer, just motioned him forward. They slid into the fissure, bodies pressed close to the cool stone. The space was so narrow Caleb had to turn sideways. The passage wound deeper into shadow, the sound of hooves growing louder outside. They had no room to move. No room to draw a gun. Barely room to breathe. Nara's voice was a whisper. Stay still. Caleb held his breath as the thunder of hooves drew right above them, so close the stone around them vibrated. Shouts echoed. They went this way! Track him down! Then, silence. Long, heavy silence. Caleb exhaled slowly. Nara pressed a hand lightly against his arm, signaling patience. They waited several more minutes before she finally nodded. They passed us, she murmured. The trail bends. They will follow it north. We head south then, Caleb said. Yes. She led the way deeper into the passage until it opened into a small hollow on the other side, a hidden pocket of land dotted with scattered brush. They stepped out, both covered in dust. Caleb brushed off his shirt. I'd take that path again over getting shot, but I won't say I enjoyed it. Nara allowed the faintest flicker of a smile. You complain often. I'm wounded, Caleb said. You would complain even if you were not. He huffed a breath, almost a laugh. They continued southward for another hour, moving quickly through the low brush. The sun neared the horizon, casting long blue shadows over the plains. At last they reached the edge of the poplar grove. The trees whispered in the wind, their leaves shimmering like tiny coins. A small stream wound through the center. Nara stopped, scanning the area with sharp eyes. Her shoulders eased. We are close. Caleb nodded. Good. But as they stepped farther into the grove, a rustling sound caught Caleb's attention. He stiffened, hand going to his gun. Nara lifted a hand. Do not draw. Why not? He whispered. Because, came a voice from behind a cluster of trees, calm but commanding. You are already surrounded. Caleb went still. Figures emerged from the grove, 12, maybe 15 of them. Apache warriors, bows drawn, eyes sharp and unwavering. Their movements were controlled, precise, unhesitating. Caleb slowly raised his hands. Nara stepped forward, speaking in her language, a stream of fast, rhythmic words. The warriors' expressions shifted. Some lowered their bows slightly. One of them, a tall man with braids tied in red cloth, stepped forward. He looked at Nara with wide eyes. You are alive? Yes, she said softly. He embraced her briefly, relief in every line of his face. When he pulled back, he glanced at Caleb with suspicion. Nara placed a hand on Caleb's arm. He saved my life. The warriors looked at Caleb again, not friendly, but assessing. The tall man approached him. I am Tahoma, he said. Nara is my kin. If you protected her, then you will come with us. Caleb swallowed. Gladly. The warriors surrounded them, not as captors but as escorts. They led Caleb and Nara deeper into the grove, where small fires flickered and low tents stood among the trees. Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, something like relief, though tempered by exhaustion and caution. They had made it. For now. Nara walked beside him, her posture easing for the first time since they met. You are safe here, she said quietly. Caleb looked at her, dust in her hair, determination in her eyes, sunburn on her cheek, and something warm moved through him. I'm glad, he said. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away just as quickly. But the moment lingered, soft and fragile, like a desert flower blooming in the brief cool of dusk. Caleb followed Nara into the heart of the grove. The small camp seemed alive with quiet movement, children running between tents, women preparing food over low fires, and warriors tending to their bows and arrows. The air smelled of sage and warm earth. It was a rhythm of life he hadn't known he craved until now. Tahoma, the tall man who had first greeted them, approached Caleb. His gaze was measured, careful, but not unkind. "You have proven yourself. You risked your life for Nara. That is honor enough." Caleb inclined his head, feeling the weight of the journey, the fight, and the countless choices that had led him here. "I only did what I should have," he said quietly. "She didn't deserve harm." Tahoma studied him a long moment, then nodded. "Then you are welcome here, among my people. Not as an outsider, but as one who walks with truth." Nara came forward, brushing dust from her cloak. Her eyes met his, dark and unyielding, yet softened by relief. "You've seen the worst of men," she said. "And yet you stayed." "I didn't have a choice," Caleb said, shaking his head. "Not with you." For the first time, a faint smile crossed her lips, and it warmed him in ways he didn't fully understand. They walked together to the edge of the camp, where the children had paused their play to watch the newcomers. One small boy, no older than 7, ran up and offered Caleb a stick carved into a crude arrow shape. He accepted it with a nod, feeling a small spark of connection to these people who had once seemed so foreign. Evening fell, and the camp settled into quiet rhythms. Fires flickered, shadows danced, and a soft wind rustled the poplars. Caleb and Nara sat side by side on a flat rock near the stream, their shoulders touching lightly. The river gurgled beside them, carrying the scent of life and promise. "You belong here," Caleb said softly, almost to himself. "If you want to." Nara turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "And you?" she asked. "Where do you belong, Caleb?" He exhaled slowly, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. "I think I'd belong wherever you are." The words surprised him in their honesty. He wasn't sure if he meant it fully, or if it was simply the truth of the moment pressing against his chest like the weight of a summer sun. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned gently against him, resting her head on his shoulder. The contact was quiet, unassuming, but it spoke volumes. He put his arm around her, holding her close without need for words. Around them, the camp hummed softly, the whispers of life, the distant laughter of children, the crackle of fire. The dangers of the day, the violence of the past weeks, the relentless pursuit, they all felt distant here. They had survived. They had arrived. Caleb closed his eyes briefly, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, the sound of the river, the whispering trees. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't weighed down by fear, vengeance, or solitude. A life shared with someone who understood courage, resilience, and the quiet truths of survival. Nara lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes. "You will stay?" she asked softly. "I will," he said, voice steady. "As long as you want me." A small smile touched her lips, and she nodded. No grand gestures, no words needed beyond that. The desert, the sun, the wind, they were witnesses. And in that witness, the unspoken promise between them solidified. The night deepened. The stars spread across the sky, uncountable, brilliant, unyielding. Caleb and Nara sat together, wrapped in blankets, listening to the pulse of the grove, the heartbeat of a life that was no longer merely survival. Somewhere deep in the canyon, the last traces of their pursuers faded, swallowed by the land. The West had tested them, beaten them, chased them, but here, under the trees, beside the river, they had found safety, trust, and something far rarer, a beginning. And so, as the fire's glow reflected in their eyes, Caleb Cole, the drifter, soldier, and survivor, understood that home was not a place on a map. It was a shared life, a bond forged in danger, honor, and enduring courage. And with Nara by his side, he would face whatever came next with open heart and steady hand. The night passed, quiet and infinite. The desert slept. And the story of the outlaw who saved the Apache beauty, and the woman who refused to leave him behind, found its first peace.